welcome. This is 15-Minute Ferments, and I'm Austin Durant. Can you guys hear me? Could you just let me know if, just type in like thumbs up or yes, I can hear you, or give me a good sign before we get started here. Looks like there's a little bit of a delay as usual, but nothing we can't deal with. All right, cool. Great. So in this week's episode, we're going to talk about kimchi, but we're going to be basically talking about some of the lesser known vegetables or things that you can do. The title of the episode is called "You Can Kimchi That," and of course I'm using that somewhat liberally in a verb format. Just like you can pickle that, if you remember that from Portlandia, you can kimchi that. So what I'm going to show you is 4 different vegetables that you might not think of when you think of kimchi, but they all make delicious kimchi. So the first thing I want to show you guys is that I'm going to switch over to the overhead cam. These are actually the finished versions of it. So what I've got here are Brussels sprouts kimchi. Let's see if I can get, which is amazing. If you like Brussels sprouts, that is. This is snap pea kimchi, which we're going to make today. And this is cauliflower kimchi that I made a couple weeks ago. And it's also good. But again, you have to like the underlying vegetables. It's not going to magically make something that you don't like likable, but it will enhance the flavor of vegetables that are that are around. So let me go turn on an overhead light. Be right back. All right, so the basic principles of making kimchi are to soak the vegetable, whether that's cabbage or radish, which are the traditional kimchi ingredients. You want to do that in order to soften up the vegetable and also to give it a little bit of salt. I like to use a 6% brine, which just means 6% of the weight of salt to the rest of the weight of water. So if I'm making a liter, 1,000 milliliters or grams of water, then I would use 60 grams of salt. And I basically like to use a kitchen scale to measure out my brine. There are volumetric equivalents. So let's say you've got a quart or a liter of water, about somewhere just shy of 3 tablespoons or 45 milliliters is that's the equivalent of about 5 or 6%. So what I've done ahead of time is to prepare these vegetables. And what I've done is made 3 or 4 different jars. So I've got snap peas here. So again, I've just put them into a 6% brine. And they've been soaking for about 4 hours. So I got my snap peas. And I've also done the same thing with more cauliflower. So I grew this Romanesco cauliflower in my garden, and it was so huge, I've been figuring out what to do with it ever since. So again, I soaked this in a 6% brine, started it about 4 hours ago, so it's still sitting in the brine. And lastly, this is actually a more traditional one you might see. This is called kakdugi, which is basically radish that has been cut into cube sizes. So you might see this if you go to a Korean restaurant, the banchan, which is the spread of different pickles and kimchi. You might see this. It's a fairly common version of kimchi. And finally, one that's really neat that you may not see a lot of is to actually use onions or chives. So been soaking green onions here, just weighing them down with the rock and softening them up. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take these and with all of these, we're going to drain it out and we're going to slather them with the paste. So that's really the steps involved here. So soak the vegetables, soften them up, and then drain the brine, add the paste, and pack it and let it ferment for a few days. So let's see. Now, the other key ingredient, of course, in all of this is what I'm calling the kimchi paste. And I always advocate what I call make-ahead paste. And basically what this is you're taking all the ingredients, which are scallions or green onions, ginger root, garlic cloves, and the red pepper powder, which is also known as gochugaru. This is basically just ground up Korean peppers. And Korean pepper is a specific type that has a specific amount of heat that's been developed for kimchi. So you can find bags of already ground, already dried red pepper powder at various Asian markets. So we've got a lot of different Asian grocery chains in Southern California, which is where I am. And so easy to find that. You can also get it online if it's hard to come by in your area. And then I also add some sort of saltiness that's in liquid form. In this case, I use tamari, which is gluten-free soy sauce. And I basically just put all those into a food processor and make a paste out of it. So I'll do a quick check here. All right. And this is kind of what the paste looks like. I'm not going to make the paste tonight, but let's see if I can get it up. It basically resembles kind of like a thick, I don't know, what does that look like? It's I don't know how to describe it. It's a thick paste. It's thicker than applesauce. It's not as liquidy. And I'll get some out of the jar and show you. But basically what I did is ahead of time I mixed all the ingredients together, and then I just put it into a jar. And what that's going to allow me to do is make kimchi, a little bit more expeditiously when I wanted to. So rather than having to chop the onions, peel the garlic, peel the ginger, put it all together every time I want to make kimchi, I just make a large batch of that now. So this is just a paste. It in itself is not fermented. It's just fresh, and then I store it in the refrigerator until times like this where we've got vegetables that need to be made into kimchi. So I've got my paste. I think I'll do the snap peas. So first thing I'm going to do is they've been soaking in the brine for about 4 hours. I'm just going to drain them out. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to just throw them in the chat, and I'll get to those. So we've got is vegetable that's should taste a little bit salty. It should be a little bit soft. So these in fact have been softened a little bit. And now all I really need to do is combine this with the paste. So I could use a bowl. But probably also, because this is a wide mouth quart-sized jar, I could probably just get right in there with my hands. But just to make it a little easier, I'm going to pour that into a bowl. I'm going to take some of my pre-made kimchi paste, which maybe that's a little bit of a better view of what the texture is like. And just start to slather it into the bowl. The idea is just to cover every morsel of whatever you're kimchiing. Again, I'm using that as a verb. Just enough to cover everything. You can kind of see it's already got a lot of the paste, and with that thickness and that texture of paste, sticks to things rather easily. So you can kind of see where we are with it. I'll probably add a little bit more paste here, so just to get it, because I like it a little on the spicy side. All right, once I've got everything more or less mixed together, all I need to do is pack it into the jar. So back into I'm going to use the same jar I used to soak. And I did put on a glove because this paste is rather spicy, and if it can irritate your skin. You can of course always use tongs and things like that, but I prefer to get in here with my hands. So, all right. So just like any type of kimchi or any type of ferment, you do want to pack the jar down. You don't really want air pockets because the fermentation that's happening is anaerobic without air. So we want to pack it and leave as little air pockets as possible. And one thing I've noticed when fermenting sort of more, I'll call more solid veggies like peas or Brussels sprouts, is they don't really give up brine the way that cabbage does. When we prepare cabbage to make kimchi, we cut it up, we salt it, we massage it, and it's sort of like, yeah, it gets a little bit softer and expresses some of its own water as it comes out of the leaves. Well, different vegetables don't do that as readily. So sometimes what we'll need to do is add a little bit of brine, and just enough so that we're covering the contents. So as you can see, this packed down pretty good. And what I can do now is just add a weight to the top of this. And then cover it up, make sure we keep flies out. But like I said, it's probably going to need a little bit more brine. So what I'm going to do is take some of the brine that we used to soak, not very much, maybe just 1 or 2 tablespoons. And I'm just going to kind of go back into the bowl that I was mixing in and kind of use this to kind of both wash out the bowl, but also to get every last little morsel of flavor in here. Then I'm just going to take this liquidy brine and just pour it into the jar. And this should create enough liquid, like I said, and whereas when we put down the weights, so we're going to put some weights on top of this, then it'll express a little bit of brine, and as long as everything's under the brine, it'll be okay. Or put more succinctly, it's fine under the brine. All right, so that's my snap peas. Next, I think I will do the radish. So again, the first step is just to pour off the brine. Add it to the bowl. Take a little bit more of the paste and just start mixing it together. Now you can also take this opportunity to add other vegetables. So for example, it's very traditional to take scallions and cut them into maybe like 1 inch, about 3 centimeter pieces, and just mix that in with the vegetables when you're packing the jar. Because it's such a soft vegetable, the onion, I mean, you don't really need to pre-soak it when you're adding it to other veggies like we're doing now. So this is again a very traditional called kakdugi, which is Korean radish. And I'm just going to go back to my soaking jar and add all the ingredients back in. Now you could also mix and match different vegetables if you wanted. So I could maybe mix the cauliflower and the radish together if I wanted to. If you do that, you do want to make sure that the vegetables sort of consistency or density or thickness is about the same, so that they ferment at about the same rate. So Brussels sprouts and cauliflower are a good example of ones that are kind of dense vegetables that would ferment well at about the same amount, at about the same rate. So I've got those two. And again, what I'm going to do is place a weight on top of the contents and then cover it with with an airlock device or just a dish towel that's clean, and wrap the whole thing with a rubber band. All right, so final ones I'll do tonight are the green onions. And again, these are kind of cool because the finished product of the green onions being the kimchi itself is rather unique. Again, it's pretty soft, and so let's see. And you can see just being a few hours in, they're pretty soft. All right, so do a little switcheroo over here. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask here, guys. Nope, not let me do it. All right. All right, cool. All right, back to, so basically now I'm just going to take these green onions and again just sort of slather everything over the surface so that they're pretty well uniformly covered. And I can give them a little bit of a kind of a, not too much of a crunch or crush, but just a little bit. Coax them to soften up a little bit more. And you can also do this with other things in the allium family, specifically chives. Chives are, even the Korean chives, the Chinese chives are sort of our traditional round ones. The Korean and Chinese ones tend to be a little bit flatter. They kind of look like grass, actually, like grass you'd find on your lawn. But yeah, onions, chives, they all create just very, very unique kimchi flavor and texture as well. So I'm just going to kind of massage these in here and get them to soften up a little bit more. Now, as far as where I'm going to ferment these, I've got sort of a flat bowl like this. I could put these back in here and then just add a rock over the top of it. In fact, I think that's what I'm going to do. If I really wanted to, I could, at this point, these are pretty flexible now. I could just sort of coax them into a mason jar as well. In fact, I might go ahead and do that. Yeah, I don't want to necessarily break them, but it's not the end of the world. You can cut them too if you want to get them to fit into a specific container. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Grab a jar. And let's get these guys in here. All right, let's see if we can get it all in one shot. Yeah, nice. And the times of fermentation, once you get these different styles in, will vary again by kind of think about the density, like how dense the vegetable is. So cauliflower, radish, which is kokdugi, Brussels sprouts, they would all I would let those ferment at least 2 weeks. So that does seem like a long time for kimchi. Most cabbage kimchis are done in anywhere from 5 to 10 days. But I find that because of the density of the vegetable, these other vegetables, you do need to give it a little more time to just kind of soften and break down. I mean, there's nothing wrong with eating it, in a week or so, but it's going to be, more or less almost like raw. It's going to still feel like it's raw. So, really a personal preference, but just so you know that the denser the vegetable, the longer it will withstand a fermentation, and is, in my experience, kind of I recommend letting it go a little bit longer. Again, if you want to achieve something that's softer. All right, so pour a little bit of brine. Again, I'm just sort of like trying to get every last, be zero waste here and get every last little bit of the paste here. I'm even kind of like rinsing off my glove hand. And because with this, you can kind of see there's a few gaps here and there in the where the onions are. So I'm going to continue to kind of press these down. Let's do my best to work the jar so that everything is compressed and there's as little air as you can get. As little air as you can. All right. All right. So now I'm going to take my extra brine. And I might come back to, what I'll do is I'll come back tomorrow, and if any of these veggies have not completely submerged as they continue to soften and begin to ferment, then I will even come back with a little bit more brine. You don't want to dilute it completely, of course, with just salty water. So I think these will be fine. But if I needed to, I could even just come back and add a little bit more paste to do that. So that's pretty much it. Like I said, what I'll do is I'm going to clean up the sides and the insides of these jars, because you don't want to leave little specks and places where airborne things like yeasts and molds can get hold. So I'll clean up both the inside and outside of the jar, cover them, make sure they are weighted down so that the brine will continue to express and that everything will be fine under the brine. And then I will also label these jars because, as you can see, I live in my own fantasy fermentation world where I've got 30 things fermenting at once. But even if that's not the case for you, it's still a good idea, because sometimes you'll forget about things and 1 or 2 or 3 weeks go by, and that's probably longer than you intended to ferment something. Not always the end of the world, but by putting the date on something, the start date, and then putting it somewhere conspicuous, I usually put it on a shelf or somewhere in the kitchen where I can see it walking by, then that'll remind you that check on things. Now with kimchi, it's a bit of an exception because kimchi lets you know it's there because it's very, very aromatic, let's just say, after about that 3rd day. So, but with other ferments, it's just a good habit to get into. So, all right, I'm going to take off my glove for now. And I'm going to actually have some already finished kimchi. So, what do you guys got? Okay, let's see. Cutting them in small pieces first. Yes, you could certainly cut those onions into smaller pieces. I've seen it where I've actually gone to a Korean market and I've seen them whole and kind of was curious about that too, because there was nothing, I've never seen anything else like that. But you could absolutely cut them first. And interestingly, green onions are also what's in this paste. So with the green onion kimchi, it's literally green onion squared, so to speak. So it's the base of the kimchi paste, but it makes this very interesting texture. So these are snap pea kimchi that I made actually that were almost 2 months old. So I started them on the 8th of March. I didn't ferment them, since then. Probably fermented about 2 weeks. Then I put them in the refrigerator, and they've been sitting there ever since. Now, they are quite tangy because even in the refrigerator, things will continue to ferment, although at an extremely slow rate. So an unscientific guess would be things ferment at about 5% of the rate in the refrigerator as they would out of the refrigerator. Because again, things are a lot more active at room temperature. So again, that's an unscientific guess just based on my experience. So things will continue to ferment, just again at a very slow rate. And here is my cauliflower kimchi. This also withstood like a good 2-week ferment, and quite honestly, it still tastes kind of raw. So probably let them go even a few more days or even a week or 2 more. Good. That one I did. I've been fermenting since the 23rd of April, so about 3 weeks now. I guess almost 4 weeks. And it's just starting to get a little bit softer, and it's still very cauliflowery. Like it's a brassica. It's like you're not into that sort of thing. And then the Brussels sprouts, which are again, if you like Brussels sprouts, this is a good treatment for them. If you don't like Brussels sprouts, I don't know. Maybe this will turn your opinion about them. I think it's a lot. The kimchi flavors obviously come through. It's softer. It's not as bold as trying to eat just steamed stuff. Again, it's a brassica, so that's what it's going to do. So that's it for how you can kimchi that. Any other questions about? I'll show you guys another slide where I kind of talk about. Let's see. Some of the other vegetables that you can use, so that I've used. So again, cabbage, radish, wax or pole beans, which is what we did with the snap peas, cauliflower, beets. I've also fermented beets, and I will cut those into chunks, kind of like I do with the radish. The radish cubes, about 1 inch or so. In fact, I think I've even made a radish beet kimchi mixture, and that was lovely. We've already seen green onions. You can also take larger greens like mustard greens or collard greens, and rinse, brine those too for a few hours. They'll soften up, and then they make a great kimchi. That contrast of that sort of that bitterness that comes with this type of the greens goes well with the other flavors that we know with kimchi. Salty, spicy, garlicky, etc. Cucumbers also are a great cucumber kimchi in the summertime. Is one of my favorites. I usually take the cucumber and just slice it lengthwise, and then salt it for a few hours. So because there's so much water in cucumbers, you just salt them. You don't have to submerge them in a brine, is what I mean. Just salt them for a few hours, and then take the paste and just sort of put them on top. A very traditional way in Korea is to actually, I think they sort of cut a hole through in the cucumber and stuff the paste inside. I like to be a little bit lazier. I just cut them in half and put the paste on top, and then I would lay them in a bowl like this. Make sure there's enough brine to submerge them, and they're really good and they're really fast. So cucumber kimchi for me only takes about 3 days. So it's a nice one. Also pumpkins and other squash you can make into kimchi. If you're going to do those, I would recommend mixing them with cabbage. I tried to make them on their own, and they're just like, they get really mushy. So I haven't found a squash yet. I suppose butternut squash is one of the firmer winter squash could work. I do start with those raw, do the brine, but when I try to make pumpkin, for example, it just kind of turns to mush. So I advise like sort of mixing it in, but certainly feel free to experiment with whatever vegetables you've got on hand. And I think that's about it, unless you guys have any other last minute thoughts here. I appreciate you tuning in, and if you're watching this on the replay, feel free to leave a comment. Let me know what you think, and what kind of stuff you'd like to see in future episodes of 15-Minute Ferments. So thanks again for watching, and I'm Austin Durant, and I'll see you soon.